I'm Arianna Davis, and by day, I'm the digital director of Oh, the Oprah magazine, but I'm also the author of What Would Frida Do? A Guide to Living Boldly. I'm also a major Toni Morrison fan, love every single thing she's ever written, and I'm so excited to be celebrating 50 years of the Bluest Eye this year. It's really interesting that 50 years later, the Bluest Eye is still just as relevant in 2020 as it is when it first came out. I think the Bluest Eye is a sad and poignant ode to loving yourself and the importance of embracing yourself and self-love. And I think that that is something that we all could use a reminder of now more than ever in 2020, given the racial reckonings that are happening in this country, our constant battle as people of color to overcome and to have the rest of the world see us for as beautiful as we know we are. And I think that that is particularly relevant when you think about the Bluest Eye now in 2020. So as you know, this is a read along. I will be reading a section of the Bluest Eye, and after I read my section, I'll be offering some reflections, and you can catch the full reading on Instagram at @lovekindcure. Here we go. At the end of the alley, he could see men clustered like grapes. One large whooping voice spiraled over the heads of the bended forms. The kneeling forms, the leaning forms, all intent on one ground spot. As he came closer, he inhaled a rife and stimulating man smell. The men were gathered, just as the man in the pool hall had said, for and about dice and money. Each figure was decorated some way with the slight pieces of green. Some of them had separated their money, folded the bills around their fingers, clenched the fingers into fists, so the neat ends of the money stuck out in a blend of daintiness and violence. Others had stacked their bills, creased them down the middle, and held the wad as though they were about to deal cards. Still, others had left their money in loosely crumpled balls. One man had money sticking out from under his cap. Another stroked his bills with a thumb and forefinger. There was more money in those black hands than Choli had ever seen before. He shared their excitement, and the dry-mouthed apprehension on meeting his father gave way to the saliva flow of excitement. He glanced at the faces, looking for the one who might be his father. How would he know him? Would he look like a larger version of himself? At that moment, Choli could not remember what his own self looked like. He only knew he was 14 years old, black, and already 6 feet tall. He searched the faces and saw only eyes, pleading eyes, cold eyes gone flat with malice, others laced with fear, all focused on the movement of a pair of dice that one man was throwing, snatching up, and throwing again. Chanting a kind of litany to which the others responded, rubbing the dice as though they were two hot coals, he whispered to them. Then, with a whoop, the cubes flew from his hand to a chorus of amazements and disappointments. Then the thrower scooped up money, and someone shouted, "Take it and crawl, you water dog, you, the best I know." There was some laughter and a noticeable release of tension, during which some men exchanged money. Choli tapped an old white-haired man on the back. "Can you tell me a Samson Fuller around here somewhere?" Fuller? The name was familiar to the man's tongue. "I don't know. He here somewhere. There he is, in the brown jacket." The man pointed. A man in a light brown jacket stood at the far end of the group. He was gesturing in a quarrelsome, agitated manner with another man. Both of them had folded their faces in anger. Choli edged around to where they stood, hardly believing he was at the end of his journey. There was his father, a man like any other man, but there indeed were his eyes, his mouth, his whole head. His shoulders lurked beneath that jacket, his voice, his hands, all real. They existed, really existed, somewhere. Right here. Choli had always thought of his father as a giant man, so when he was very close, it was with a shock that he discovered that he was taller than his father. In fact, he was staring at a balding spot on his father's head, which he suddenly wanted to stroke. While thus fascinated by the pitiable clean space hedged around by neglected tufts of wool, the man turned a hard, belligerent face to him. "What you want, boy?" Is you Samson Fuller? Who sent you?" "Huh? You Melba's boy?" "No, sir, Choli blinked. He could not remember his mother's name. Had he ever known it? What could he say? Whose boy was he? He couldn't say, "I'm your boy." That sounded disrespectful. The man was impatient. "Something wrong with your head? Who told you to come after me?" "Nobody." Choli's hands were sweating. The man's eyes frightened him. I was just wandering around and, my name is Choli." But Fuller had turned back to the game that was about to begin anew. He bent down to toss a bill on the ground and waited for a throw. When it was gone, he stood up and in a vexed and whiny voice shouted at Choli, "Tell that bitch to get her money. Now get the fuck out of my face." Choli was a long time picking his foot up from the ground. He was trying to back up and walk away. Only with extreme effort could he get the first muscle to cooperate. When it did, he walked back up the alley, out of its shade, toward the blazing light of the street. As he emerged into the sun, he felt something in his legs give way. An orange crate with a picture of clasping hands pasted on its side was upended on the sidewalk. Choli sat down on it. The sunshine dropped like honey on his head. A horse-drawn fruit wagon went by, its driver singing, "Fresh from the vine, sweet as sugar, red as wine." Noises seemed to increase in volume. The click-clock of the woman's heels, the laughter of idling men in doorways. There was a streetcar somewhere. Choli sat. He knew if he was very still, he would be all right. But then the trace of pain edged his eyes, and he had to use everything to send it away. If he was very still, he thought, and kept his eyes on one thing, the tears would not come. So he sat in the dripping honey sun, pulling every nerve and muscle into service to stop the fall of water from his eyes. While straining in this way, focusing every urge of energy in his eyes, his bowels suddenly opened up, and before he could realize what he knew, liquid stools were running down his legs. At the mouth of the alley where his father was, on an orange crate in the sun, on a street full of grown men and women, he had soiled himself like a baby. In panic, he wondered, should he wait there, not moving until nighttime? No. His father would surely emerge and see him and laugh. Oh Lord, he would laugh. Everybody would laugh. There was only one thing to do. Choli ran down the street, aware only of silence. People's mouths moved, but their feet moved. A car jogged by, but with no sound. A door slammed in perfect soundlessness. His own feet made no sound. The air seemed to strangle him, hold him back. He was pushing through a world of invisible pine snap that threatened to smother him. Still, he ran, seeing only silent moving things, until he came to the end of buildings, the beginning of open space, and saw the Okmulgee River winding ahead. He scooted down a gravelly slope to a pier jutting out over the shallow water. Finding the deepest shadow under the pier, he crouched in it behind one of the posts. He remained knotted there in fetal position, paralyzed, his fist covering his eyes, for a long time. No sound, no sight, only darkness and heat and the press of his knuckles on his eyelids. He even forgot his messed up trousers. Evening came. The dark, the warmth, the quiet enclosed Choli like the skin and flesh of an elderberry protecting its own seed. Choli stirred. The ache in his head was all he felt. Soon, like the bright bits of glass, the events of that afternoon cut into him. At first, he saw only money in black fingers, then he thought he was sitting on an uncomfortable chair, but when he looked, it turned out to be the head of a man, a head with a bald spot the size of an orange. When finally these bits merged into full memory, Choli began to smell himself. He stood up and found himself weak, trembling, and dizzy. He leaned for a moment on the pier post, then took off his pants, underwear, socks, and shoes. He rubbed handfuls of dirt on his shoes, then he crawled to the river edge. He had to find the water's beginning with his hands, for he could not see it clearly. Slowly, he swirled his clothes in the water and rubbed them until he thought they were clean. Back near his post, he took off his shirt and wrapped it around his waist, then spread his trousers and underwear on the ground. He squatted down and picked at the rotted wood of the pier. Suddenly, he thought of his Aunt Jimmy, her asafoetida bag, her 4 gold teeth, and the purple rag she wore around her head. With a longing that almost split him open, he thought of her handing him a bit of smoked hawk out of her dish. He remembered just how she held it, clumsy-like and 3 fingers, but with so much affection. No words, just picking up a bit of meat and holding it out to him. And then the tears rushed down his cheeks to make a bouquet under his chin. 3 women are leaning out of 2 windows. They see the long, clean neck of a new young boy and call to him. He goes to where they are. Inside, it is dark and warm. They give him lemonade in a mason jar. As he drinks, their eyes float up to him through the bottom of the jar, through the slick, sweet water. They give him back his manhood, which he takes aimlessly. The pieces of Choli's life could become coherent only in the head of a musician. Only those who talk their talk through the gold of curved metal, or in the touch of black and white rectangles and taut skins and strings echoing from wooden corridors, could give true form to his life. Only they would know how to connect the heart of a red watermelon to the At50 bag, to the muscadine, to the flashlight on his behind, to the fist of money, to the lemonade in a mason jar, to a man called Blue, and come up with what all of that meant in joy and pain and anger and love, and give it its final and pervading ache of freedom. Only a musician would know, without even knowing what he knew, that Choli was free. Dangerously free. Free to feel whatever he felt. Fear, guilt, shame, love, grief, pity. Free to be tender or violent, to whistle or weep. Free to sleep in doorways or between the white sheets of a singing woman. Free to take a job, free to leave it. He could go to jail and not feel imprisoned, for he had already seen the furtiveness in the eyes of his jailer. Free to say, "No, sir," and smile, for he had already killed 3 white men. Free to take a woman's insults, for his body had already conquered hers. Free even to knock her in the head, for he had already cradled that head in his arms. Free to be gentle when she was sick, or mop her floor, for she knew what and where his maleness was. He was free to drink himself into a silly helplessness, for he had already been a Gandhi dancer, done 30 days on a chain gang, and kicked a woman's bullet out of the calf of his leg. He was free to live his fantasies, and free even to die, the how and the when of it which held no interest for him. In those days, Choli was truly free. Abandoned in a junk heap by his mother, rejected for a crap game by his father, there was nothing more to lose. He was alone with his own perceptions and appetites, and they alone interest him. It was in this godlike state that he met Pauline Williams, and it was Pauline, or rather marrying her, that did for him what the flashlight did not do. The constantness, varietylessness, the sheer weight of sameness drove him to despair and froze his imagination. To be required to sleep with the same woman forever was a curious and unnatural idea to him. To be expected to dredge up enthusiasms for old acts and routine ploys, he wondered at the arrogance of the female. When he had met Pauline in Kentucky, she was hanging over a fence, scratching herself with a broken foot. The neatness, the charm, the joy he awakened in her made him want to nest with her. He had yet to discover what destroyed that desire. But he did not dwell on it. He thought rather of whatever had happened to the curiosity he used to feel. Nothing interested him now. Not himself, not other people. Only in drink was there some break, some floodlight, and when that closed, there was oblivion. But the aspect of married life that dumbfounded him and rendered him totally dysfunctional was the appearance of children. Having no idea of how to raise children and having never watched any parent raise himself, he could not even comprehend what such a relationship should be. Had he been interested in the acclamation of things, he would have thought of them as his material heirs. Had he needed to prove himself to some nameless others, he could have wanted them to excel in his own image and for his own sake. Had he not been alone in the world since he was 13, knowing only a dying old woman who felt responsible for him, but whose age, sex, and interests were so remote from his own, he might have felt a stable connection between himself and the children. As it was, he reacted to them, and his reactions were based on what he felt in the moment. So it was on a Saturday afternoon, in the thin light of spring, he staggered home reeling drunk and saw his daughter in the kitchen. She was washing dishes, her small back hunched over the sink. Choli saw her dimly and could not tell what he saw or what he felt. Then he became aware that he was uncomfortable. Next, he felt the discomfort dissolve into pleasure. The sequence of his emotions were revulsion, guilt, pity, then love. His revulsion was a reaction to her young, helpless, hopeless presence. Her back hunched that way, her head to one side as though crouching from a permanent and unrelieved blow. Why did she have to look so whipped? She was a child, unburdened. Why wasn't she happy? The clear statement of her misery was an accusation. He wanted to break her neck, but tenderly. Guilt and impotence rose in a bilious duet. What could he do for her, ever? What give her? What say to her? What could a burned-out black man say to the hunchback of his 11-year-old daughter? If he looked into her face, he would see those haunted, loving eyes. The hauntedness would irritate him. The love would move him to fury. How dare she love him? Hadn't she any sense at all? What was he supposed to do about that? Return it? How? What could his callous hands produce to make her smile? What if his knowledge of the world and of love could be useful to her? What could his heavy arms and befuddled brain accomplish that would earn him his own respect, that would in turn allow him to accept her love? His hatred of her slimed in his stomach and threatened to become vomit. But just before the puke moved from anticipation to sensation, she shifted her weight and stood on one foot, scratching the back of her calf with her toe. It was a quiet and pitiful gesture. Her hands were going around and around a frying pan, scraping the flecks of black into cold, greasy dishwater. The timid, tucked-in look of the scratching toe, that was what Pauline was doing the first time he saw her in Kentucky, leaning over a fence, staring at nothing in particular. The creamy toe of her bare foot scratching a velvet leg. It was such a small and simple gesture, and it filled him then with a wondering softness. Not the usual lust to part tight legs with his own, but a tenderness, a protectiveness, a desire to cover her foot with his hand and gently nibble away the itch from the calf with his teeth. He did it then and startled Pauline into laughter. He did it now. The tenderness welled up in him, and he sank to his knees, his eyes on the foot of his daughter. Crawling on all fours toward her, he raised his hand and caught the foot in an upward stroke. Piccola lost her balance and was about to careen to the floor. Choli raised his other hand to her hips to save her from falling. He put his head down and nibbled at the back of her leg. His mouth trembled at the firm sweetness of the flesh. He closed his eyes, letting his fingers dig into her waist. The rigidness of her shocked body, the silence of her stunned throat, was better than Pauline's easy laughter had been. The confused mixture of his memories of Pauline and the doing of a wild and forbidden thing excited him, and a bolt of desire ran down his genitals, giving it length and softening the lips of his anus. Surrounding all of this lust was a border of politeness. He wanted to fuck her, tenderly, but the tenderness would not hold. The tightness of her vagina was more than he could bear. His soul seemed to slip down to his guts and fly out into her, and the gigantic thrust he made into her then provoked the only sound she made, a hollow suck of air in the back of her throat, like the rapid loss of air from a circus balloon. Following the disintegration, the falling away of sexual desire, he was conscious of her wet, soapy hands on his wrists, the fingers clenching, but whether her grip was from a hopeless but stubborn struggle to be free or from some other emotion, he could not tell. Removing himself from her was so painful to him, he cut it short and snatched his genitals out of the dry harbor of her vagina. She appeared to have fainted. Choli stood up and could see only her grayish panties, so sad and limp around her ankles. Again, the hatred mixed with tenderness. The hatred would not let him pick her up. The tenderness forced him to cover her. So when the child regained consciousness, she was lying on the kitchen floor under a heavy quilt, trying to connect the pain between her legs with the face of her mother looming over her. That part is always really hard to get through. It's a lot. I won't say I hope you enjoyed that reading because I know that there are so many layers to it, but it is such a big part of the story of the Bluest Eye, and Toni Morrison's writing so vividly brings it to life that it's hard to even process. I think that if I could offer any love or wisdom to Piccola, looking back at her and even thinking about my own self as a young girl today, I think I would tell her, love yourself as you are, baby girl. There are so many people in your life. There are so many people surrounding you who make you feel less than, but you are enough. You, as you are enough. No changing of your eye color, no changing of who you are will ever change the fact that you are enough. You are enough. 2020 has been an intense year, and I think thinking about Toni Morrison and this book and what it means now, one of the greatest things that sticks with me when I think about Toni Morrison is she always was an advocate for telling the stories that you need to tell. She talks about the Bluest Eye was the story that she didn't write for anyone else. She wrote it for herself. It was a story that she wanted to read, and so she wrote it. And I think that now in 2020, what we can take from Toni Morrison is the reminder that if there's something inside of you that you want to let out into the world, whether it's a story or a book or it's a piece of art or it's a song or whatever it might be, Let it out. If it's inside of you, even if it's just for yourself, do it for you, like Toni Morrison did for herself. Luckily, it was a gift that we all got to take, but in the end, she did it for herself because she was truly a writer, not just an author, but a writer. And I will forever be grateful to her for that. So before I sign off, my word of gratitude to Toni Morrison is thank you, Toni Morrison, for the words. Thank you for the words that have inspired me as a writer, the words that have inspired so many of us to look inside ourselves, the words that have pushed all of us to be more introspective and look inside ourselves and tell our own stories. Thank you. Thank you guys for reading along with me, and that was a journey. If you haven't read The Bluest Eye, I hope that you take this book in, and if you're rereading it for another time, I hope that you enjoy rereading Toni Morrison's famous words. You can catch the full reading on Instagram at @LoveKindCure. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, I'm Arianna Davis, and signing off. Thanks.
We'll get to the promised land.